I'm here today with Tom Dollard, who's architect and partner at Pollard Thomas Edwards, or PTE, and Tom leads on sustainability and innovation throughout the practice. And he's just published with the RIBA this excellent book, Designed to Perform, which is basically an illustrated guide to delivering energy efficient homes with some excellent comments detailing and recommendations. So, Tom, this is the second edition. You've just updated something you wrote a few years ago. Can you tell me about the history of developing the book and also about its success?
Yeah, the first edition was surprisingly a bestseller, really. We wrote it, I wrote it in 2016 following about 5 years research that I'd done with the Zero Carbon Hub. And following that research, we did a series of guidance reports for the industry. The best one was, or the most popular one was the Builder's Book, which was aimed at trades and explaining the issues that we found on sites for the trades. And that was, again, hugely popular, downloaded thousands of times from the website. So then I thought, okay, we need to grab onto this, turn it into a book aimed at more at the design community, because we saw, yes, some of these issues are site-based, but equally a lot of those stem from the design. And so that gave me the idea to write this book for primarily architects. And it sold out. Several print runs did really well, and so I think there was a clear demand to write another edition with more content.
Can you tell me what's changed in the intervening period?
It wasn't just kind of editing a few details based on the new building regs, for example. So we have done that. We've had a new fire regs, new Part L, the energy regs. Part F, ventilation has changed. Part O, even, there's an overheating regulation. So part of it was editing some of the content to suit the new regulations. But then really there was a need for a lot more details and a lot more diagrams and sites. So I included probably about 5 more case studies, passive house case studies at scale. And I wanted to show that this can be delivered at scale, apartments, more than 100 homes at a time. And then I added a chapter on natural building materials, partly responding to a huge shift in the industry, moving away from this focus just on operational energy and in-use carbon, but moving more into the embodied carbon from construction. That being the upfront carbon that is going to have more of a significant effect on climate change. So the industry realised that, I'd say 5 years ago, there was a big shift in thinking among professionals that we need to look at embodied carbon as well as operational. And so the natural building materials chapter and other elements have looked at that.
You described the appalling failure of the industry to deliver homes that meet intended performance targets. I mean, apart from getting people to read your book, what more can be done?
I think it's a huge issue, isn't it? We have realised, I think Grenfell was the great example of how building failures, design failures and installation failures affect the whole industry. So clearly there's an issue. I think, the biggest barriers aren't really technical or economical. It's more about knowledge and skills. And I think, so this book will help, and I've been promoting it up and down the country virtually. I spoke to 1,000 architects yesterday on a webinar, so absolutely blew the numbers out of the sky in terms of people seeing this. So training of this amongst professionals, but then really the biggest block is skills on site at the moment. So I think there's a number of ways we can deal with that. Skills and training at that level. I think government could be incentivising trades to do that, because at the moment they have to take a day off work, so they're not going to want to do a training course. So incentivising things like passive house training for trades. You can now do a course for passive house as a trade. Incentivising other training. And then there's possibly a whole piece around legislation as well. How do we regulate more, which is coming through with the Building Safety Act and the reaction to Grenfell. But I think more needs to be done on that to really check that what we're designing is being delivered. And then I guess finally there's probably a role for clients as well to ask for that. So I think clients could take some of the stuff in this book and put it in their tender set and ask contractors to demonstrate performance rather than just deliver to the normal employer's requirements. Can you demonstrate that your energy bills are going to be the same as the design?
I mean, I presume the impact of Grenfell will actually improve things because the focus on competency now rather than just CPD is probably making a real difference.
I think so, yeah. It's got very real. That was an example of a performance gap. You know, it was a different construction parameter, but this book is talking more about thermal energy efficiency, but that has a huge overlap with fire, acoustics, damp, structural performance, this whole idea of whole construction performance. So by focusing on thermal, I think you will also get the fire stopping right. You know, you'll ensure there's continuous insulation and continuous fire stopping. And previous to Grenfell and the acts that's the legislation that's following that, we didn't have that stick. It was almost, you do the design, building control come on site 4 times and they loosely check some of the installation and then it's signed off. There's very, very little compliance. So I think that will change with the Building Safety Act. However, I think Part L needs to look at this. The energy efficiency regulation also needs to look at this. And I'm currently working on Part L with DLUC at the moment. We won the contract to assist in that. So we're going to try and bring in some of these measures of quality assurance on site, more robust design. Is there an incentive as well for contractors to do better? So we'll look at that. Maybe there's some sort of financial incentive if you demonstrate compliance.
You describe passive house as the optimum building envelope. I mean, how feasible is it to roll out more passive house projects, both in the private and in the public sector?
There's upwards of almost 2,000 passive houses been built to date. There's been a huge uptake in the last few years, and you'll know the high-profile case studies of Goldsmith Street in Norwich, Agar Grove in Camden, and there's others as well. Rains Park, Exeter City Living are doing, that's their standard. Cambridge now have got a whole programme that we've been delivering for them of passive house. So it is slowly scaling up, and I guess to answer your question in the other way, passive house has always been bottom up. It's never had any incentives, never had any legislation, regulation requiring it. It's been a ground up because both customers, residents, and also designers and contractors have realised the benefits. They realise it works. They realise it's worth the extra effort. It is harder to deliver. It's a better quality of construction. So scaling up is going to be a challenge to deliver that higher quality of construction at scale. I think we can do it with, you know, first of all, it's not going to happen overnight. So you're going to need a few years to scale up. But it's already happening through local authorities requiring passive house, as I said, the city regions. I'd love to see London require it, you know, GLA funding requiring it, and possibly Homes England funding to require it. That would be a really good move. I think once you require it in funding, the industry will meet those skills. I think as soon as it's in there, give them a few years, people will scale up. You know, it's only 2 days to go on a course to know about passive house. And that's for a tradesperson, designer. It's a 10-day course to be a certified passive house designer. You could already, the numbers of certified passive house designers scaling up hugely. So I think it's a challenge, but I think it's possible with the skills we've got now at design stage. The trades definitely need more work. But then the final thing I'll say on that, I think passive house and better quality construction could possibly, I think the jury's still out, but could possibly be helped with modern methods of construction, specifically panelised construction, which we're seeing ramp up. You know, there's I think 1,000 homes last year built with MMC by the volumetric big providers, the Cat 1 providers. So I think then they're looking at ramping up. Homes England is requiring more MMC through their frameworks. And there is certainly an overlap. I'm hesitant to say it's been demonstrated, but there's certainly good evidence to show that if you're building something in a factory with a good design, you can get very good air tightness, very good quality assurance, which will help with energy efficiency.
But there is a cost differential, isn't there? I mean, how feasible is that in these rather difficult times?
Well, it is a barrier. So, I mean, the barriers to passive house, much research done in this area, but tend to be 3 or 4 themes. Economic is probably the biggest one. But I see that as a short-term barrier. Most data is showing that it's around 10% extra cost. The Agar Grove scheme in Camden was around 10% extra, Norwich as well. So some schemes slightly less, 5%. A 5 to 10% extra construction cost isn't going to stop those homes being built. It's not affecting viability. What it is doing is affecting the viability equation, the development economics, and so it will have downward pressure on either the land value, if you know about it in advance, or the supply chain, or developer profits. So one of those 3 parts of the viability will have to take that 8% extra, 10% extra on board. So we're seeing it a bit of an issue in the short term, but as soon as this scales up, it's really a supply chain issue, because as soon as the window manufacturers start doing triple glazing as their standard, it won't be any extra. As soon as the ventilation industry does MVHR more than 20%, at the moment it's just 20% of the market, but if they get up to 50% of the market, then it'll become the same price and costs will come down. So at scale, I see passive house. And Europe has shown that, the Netherlands, Belgium, Austria, Germany have shown that if you regulate something, as they've done in Brussels, where passive house is the building regs, the costs come down within 5 years. It becomes normal. So yeah.
And you just mentioned natural materials, but they all have disadvantages that require even more careful detailing than standard construction methods. I mean, aren't they a recipe for disaster?
It's certainly creating a challenge, but I don't think that's a reason not to consider them. This book doesn't say you should use natural materials or you should use concrete or masonry. What it does, it gives you examples, solutions to use 7 different construction materials in the best way you can. So yes, natural materials such as straw panels, hempcrete, even clay blocks do require different detailing. You do need to be careful around damp, but it's been demonstrated we can get around those issues. There have been built examples of straw panels. Even probably the most radical is rammed earth construction. I'm not suggesting that we use rammed earth to build all new homes, but possibly internal walls, possibly some shelters, external uses, other programs. So it's really about putting the knowledge out there and then letting the individual design team and clients see how they want to use it, and giving them solutions. So if you do want to use straw panel, we know there are some great examples. There's a passive house built in Hertfordshire that's used a straw panel system. It's an MMC product. It's been highly engineered in the factory. The quality is past warranty providers, building control. So there are ways of doing these things, but it's obviously still a challenge.
Yeah.
I think it's a challenge, but the importance is there, because I think the big shift in the last few years has been the recognition of the climate emergency and it being very short term. So the next 10 years is critical to the path of keeping it below 2 degrees. I mean, I think we're already understanding that 1.5 is probably not going to be possible, but below 2, we really need to ramp down construction embodied carbon. So concrete, steel in new buildings are going to be that's a huge part of our footprint, and so far the construction industry hasn't been doing well at all. The latest CCC report shows that construction industry has increased its CO2, so whilst it should be coming down, all the other sectors, transport, are coming down, construction industry is going up in the last few years. So natural building materials, yes, they're a challenge, but they're one way. If you want to build new homes, they're one way of addressing that. Timber frame, that's probably as a natural material, it's probably the most viable. So timber frame done in a factory, really good quality assurance. You can have a natural insulation such as a wood fibre or a sheep's wool or a cork or a hemp, whatever it is. Then you get the best of both worlds, and that's what we should be aiming for. If we're going to be doing new builds, and there's a whole subject on whole different argument on whether you should be doing new build in a climate emergency, whether you should be adding to the problem. But if we are going to be doing new build, we need to make sure that first of all, has very, very little construction impact, embodied carbon, and second of all, is at Passive House or better, net zero, so taking hardly anything off the grid.
You start the book by talking about the growing public awareness of the climate crisis, but when are you going to do a book on retrofitting of all the millions of homes that really need to be upgraded if we're really to have any impact on the situation?
Yes, very, very good question. That is the key problem. New build in many ways is kind of easy. There's a lot more money in new build, investment in new build, profit in new build. And so I think it's an easy win, really, to kind of get on the back of that development cycle and improve it to be low carbon materials and Passive House. That's almost an easy win. We can. There's investment funds already there chomping at the bit. Retrofit is a much harder problem. There's much less money in it. Return on investment's very long or slower. It should be getting a lot better with recent fuel prices increases. But that's still not going to attract too much easy funding. So it really does need government to step up. They have stepped up a bit. We've got the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which we've been involved with. And practices like PT we are now looking regularly at refurbishment, retrofit instead of demolition new build. In fact, we're working with the Barnsbury estate just over there, 800 homes. The old Barnsbury estate, we're retrofitting to zero carbon standard on a block by block basis, and then we're building some new as well to pay for that. So there's certainly much more appreciation of the retrofit problem across practice, but also clients. And on an individual level, yeah, I'd love to do a book on retrofit. I think there is a need for one. I'm just waiting, I guess, to have some time in my diary, but also to get more experience. You know, PT as a practice have done a lot of retrofit in the past. We famously started the practice in the 70s and 80s, the regeneration of Thames waterside by Tower Bridge. We did Butler's Wharf and New Concordia Wharf, the first wharf buildings to be refurbished in the 80s and 90s. So we have a long history of doing retrofit, but I really want to take that and push it into zero carbon levels of performance to tackle energy, fuel poverty and carbon. So yeah, watch this space, Peter. I'll hopefully in the next few years.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.